going. Okay, I want to welcome everyone. I'm very happy that you're here. This is our topic webinar number 9 about Judaism and the environment. I'm really excited that we're doing this one because this is one of my favorite topics. It's the reason that I worked at JNF for so many years. But let's start off with our agenda. So because there are more people on this webinar than usual, I can't have you all up on the screen speaking. But if anybody has anything to say, I do have my Q&A window up, so please feel free. I really love it when you participate, so type anything that you would like to say. I wanted to start out by talking about last month and asking if anybody had anything interesting they wanted to share about their discussions on gratitude. I will share one thing that someone said last time that she was going to do that I think was exciting, and things that we can share because we can give each other ideas. She made a playlist of songs that started with "Thank You," and made and gave the participants. And she told me that she started the session by serving things for which people are grateful, i.e., chocolate and wine. And I'm sure they had a great time. So as you can see also up on the screen, we have a Facebook group. You probably all know that by now. But please, when you do cool stuff like that, share it on Facebook because it helps give other people great ideas of what they can do. And that's a very nice thing to share. Okay, so if nobody has anything to say, I don't see anything, I will go to the next slide. Oh no. Okay, I don't know about you, Carol, but I just lost our PowerPoint. Do you see it? Do you guys see it? I don't think you do. No, Keynote quit. I'm sorry, you guys. I don't know what is wrong with me today. Or
here we go.
Okay, good. Okay. All right, good. We can do our themes. So Rabbi Lawrence Troster, who's an important contemporary Jewish eco-theologian, he teaches that one of the most fundamental concepts in Judaism is that God created the universe. Judaism believes that only God has absolute ownership over creation. For this reason, human beings don't have unrestricted freedom to misuse nature. We are responsible to care for the world as a gift or loan from God. So the first of the themes in this topic is that God created the universe and is the sole owner of all creation. You might be familiar with the story I'm about to tell you. Good, my favorite. So here's how it goes. 2 men were fighting over a piece of land. Each claimed ownership and bolstered his claim with apparent proof. To resolve their differences, they agreed to put the case before the rabbi. The rabbi listened, but could not come to a decision because both seemed to be right. Finally, he said, "Since I cannot decide to whom this land belongs, let's ask the land." He put his ear to the ground, and after a moment straightened up. "Gentlemen, the land says it belongs to neither of you. You belong to it." And that's a story that really illustrates the whole idea of how we are not the owners of creation. We just get to use it. If anybody wants to use this story in their sessions, I'll include it in our follow-up email. Okay, another theme for this topic is that humans are responsible to care for God's creation and must not misuse it. And there's been a lot of debate over this topic, whether we are here to tend the land or to use it. And that's because the story of creation is written twice in Genesis. Once in chapter 1 and again in chapter 2. And each seems to portray a slightly different relationship between humans and the earth. The topic is covered in our first text, so we'll discuss it in more detail in a moment. But I want to go to the third theme, and that's that Judaism asks us to balance 2 competing ideas as we relate to the world. One is, "I am but dust and ashes," which is spoken by Abraham when he realizes that he's bargaining with God over Sodom and Gomorrah. The other is, "The world was created for me." And that's a phrase from the Babylonian Talmud showing that we're all unique individuals, but even though we're formed from the same mold. So there are 2 different ways of looking at it. But 2 things that are interesting that kind of, to me, give me some perspective on this issue. One, it's an interesting fact. In the Torah, in the case of both human beings and trees, the phrase min ha'adamah, from the ground, is used. So the message as I see it is that we're all part of the same thing. The other thing is, and I worked for JNF for a lot of years. I did a lot of teaching about the environment. And so I always like to say we're the top of the food chain. But if we disappeared, nobody would starve. If bees disappeared, we'd probably all starve. So that kind of also puts into perspective our place in the world. I wanted to point that out. And again, if you ever have something you'd like to say, I do have the Q&A up, so I will see it. So let's start with biblical understandings. So as we were talking about a minute ago, the story of creation is told twice in the book of Genesis. It's first told in chapter 1 and then again in chapter 2. And rabbinic commentators and biblical scholars have long debated if these two tellings represent two different versions of the same story or a melding of two creation traditions, because each of them portrays a slightly different relationship between humans and the earth. So I'm going to read the texts and note the words which I've bolded that describe the relationship between humanity and the environment. So the first one, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. They shall rule it. And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase. Fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. So that's the first one. The second one, look at the words again. When the eternal God made earth and heaven, when no shrub of the field was yet on earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the eternal God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil, but a flow would well up from the ground and water the whole surface of the earth, the eternal God formed man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. The eternal God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and placed there the man whom he had formed. And from the ground the eternal God caused to grow every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food, with a tree of life in the middle of the garden and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. The eternal God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. So now we see there are two different understandings. Are we to rule it? Or are we to tend it? And that's been a debate for many years. So one nice way to do this with your groups is divide the group in half. As one group to read and discuss the questions related to Genesis chapter 1, and ask the other group to read and discuss the questions related to Genesis chapter 2. Then ask the participants to pair off. So in each partner group, one person has read and discussed each of the texts. Then each partner can read and explain the text to their partner. So they're working in chavruta, focusing on the words that help their group develop their understanding of the relationship between humanity and the environment portrayed in the text. And then they can discuss how the understanding of the relationship between humanity and the environment are different in the two texts, and what specific words or ideas in the text lead to this distinction. But what I want to say is that when there are two seemingly contradictory ideas in the Tanakh, the rabbis work to find a solution that allows the two ideas to coexist. And the debate I'm talking about is focusing on these questions to try to allow these two ideas to coexist. So the questions they should think about when they're trying to meld these two ideas: how can human beings both master, conquer creation and guard and protect it? How do we see aspects of each of these understandings of the relationship between the environment and humanity in our world today? And I think we see a lot of that today. I just need to say the word Monsanto. And I think probably you know what I'm talking about. And how does your understanding of the relationship between human beings and the environment impact your everyday decisions? And that's very interesting because all of us every day have decisions to make that impact on the environment. We might not think about it that way, but every time you get in your car, every time you turn on a light, whether you drink water from bottled water or from your tap, all of these things, impact on us. So let's see if I think I see a question coming up, but it's so hard to do this because I'm having such issues today. Let's see what I can do. Okay. Anyway, these are, good. What is your reference to Monsanto? Okay, so there is a lot of environmentalists talk about this. Monsanto sells seeds that cannot reproduce. You have to replant every year. They're genetically modified. And they've got a lot of clout. It's very hard for farmers they can't use them again. The growing plants, they won't reproduce. So that's the thing that's in the environmental community. Anyway, so and thank you for asking. So the way that I see these two, the rule and to tend, working together, is that you have nothing to rule if you don't take care of it. So that's how I see the ideas as coexisting. Even if we are the master of creation of the nature, if we don't take care of it, we're not going to have anything left, and we probably won't be around either. That's my understanding. Does anybody have anything they'd like to contribute? And even if you don't contribute now, it'd be so interesting to see what your groups say when they have this discussion. And this is on biblical understandings. Let's see what happens when we go to modern understandings. And there's a lot of type on this screen, but it's important, I think. So the texts in our modern understandings are both from the book The Sabbath by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And Rabbi Heschel says that Shabbat as a weekly opportunity to contemplate our role in the world and to find balance between conquering and guarding the earth. So when I looked at these texts, I actually think we should take the second text from the source book first, because it relates more to the balance we're examining. So again, I bolded the words that I think illustrate this and that we need to focus on. Technical civilization is a product of labor, of man's exertion of power for the sake of grain, for the sake of producing goods. It begins when man, dissatisfied with what is available in nature, becomes engaged in a struggle with the forces of nature in order to enhance his safety and increase his comfort. To use the language of the Bible, the task of civilization is to subdue the earth, to have dominion over the beast. How proud we are of our victories in the war with nature, proud of the multitude of instruments we have succeeded in inventing, of the abundance of commodities we've been able to produce. Yet our victories have come to resemble defeats. I think what we mean by this is possibly, climate change, and a lot of the other things that are now just really coming to be important. In spite of our triumphs, we have fallen victims to the work of our hands. It is as if the forces we had conquered have conquered us. To set apart one day a week for freedom, a day on which we would not use the instruments which we have been so easily turned into weapons of destruction, a day for being with ourselves, a day of detachment from the vulgar, of independence from external obligations, a day on which we stop worshiping the idols of technical civilization, a day on which we use no money, a day of armistice in the economic struggle with our fellow men and the forces of nature. Is there any institution that holds out a greater hope for man's progress than the Sabbath? And knowing with the next text I'm going to read to you, armistice in the economic struggle with our fellow men and the forces of nature, this also relates to what actually does menucha, what is, we translate it as rest, but when we go to the next text, I think you'll see something interesting there. The solution of man's most vexing problem will not be found in renouncing technical civilization, but in attaining some degree of independence from it. In regard to external gifts, to outward possessions, there's only one proper attitude: to have, like it's okay to have your cell phone and your computer, but be able to do without them. On the Sabbath, we live, as it were, independent of technical civilization. We abstain from any activity that aims at remaking or reshaping the things of space. Man's royal privilege to conquer nature is suspended on the seventh day. And I think it's also very interesting the way Heschel says that our privilege to conquer nature is suspended, because I'm not sure that I believe we have a privilege to conquer nature, but yet I drive a car, right? And I certainly use antibiotics. So it's a very interesting place we're put in, because we have so much technology, and different people decide what they think they want to use on Shabbat and how they want to see themselves in the world. So that's something that could be very interesting to discuss with your groups also. Okay, so after we read this text, we can ask ourselves, how can Shabbat bring balance to the two understandings of creation, to master and conquer the natural world versus to guard and protect the natural world? It looks like Heschel may be saying you're just taking a break from ruling it. Other people, I think, sometimes see it as completely turning off on Shabbat and then completely turning back on. Everyone has their own place. And how can Shabbat bring you into balance with the environment? And that's a very good question. Just being aware of what you're doing and not doing, what you're using and not using, I think that in itself is a start. So that's something you might want to also discuss with your participants when you do this. Now I want to go back and look at the first text from the Sabbath. And while it seems less related to the topic of environment, to the role of humans on earth, it tells about Menucha in a really interesting and unusual way. When I read this, I went, oh, this is great. So the words, on the seventh day, God finished his work, seem to be a puzzle. Is it not said he rested on the seventh day? In 6 days, the Lord made heaven and earth. We would surely expect the Bible to tell us that on the sixth day, God finished his work. Obviously, the ancient rabbis concluded there was an act of creation on the seventh day. Just as heaven and earth were created in 6 days, Menucha, which we translate as rest, was created on the Sabbath. After the 6 days of creation, what did the universe still lack? Menucha. Came the Sabbath, came Menucha, and the universe was complete. Menucha, which we usually render with rest, they're much more than withdrawal from labor and exertion. More than freedom from toil, strain, or activity of any kind. Menucha is not a negative concept. It's not freedom from, but something real and intrinsically positive. This must have been the view of the ancient rabbis, if they believed that it took a special act of creation to bring it into being. The universe would be incomplete without it. What was created on the seventh day? Tranquility, serenity, peace, and repose. So that's a different definition of what Menucha is. To the biblical mind, Menucha is the same as happiness, as stillness, peace, and harmony. So that's what we were talking about, not having that struggle for economics on Shabbat. You get some tranquility, you get some serenity. The word with which Job described the state after life he was longing for is derived from the same root as Menucha. It is a state wherein man lies still, wherein the wicked cease from troubling and the weary are at rest. It is a state in which there is no strife and no fighting, no fear and no distrust. The essence of good life is Menucha. Then it goes into this, the Lord is my shepherd. And if anybody can tell me how they think this fits in, I would love it, because every time I read it, I'm still confused. I mean, just why it's here. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. The waters of Menuchot. That's the connection. In later times, Menucha became a synonym for the life in the world to come, of eternal life. So I guess that's why that is added in there, because Shabbat, we're looking for this Menucha in this world. And the entire world to come, as we see it, is going to be this beautiful serenity. So when we read this, we can think about how Heschel defines Menucha, and repose, which is freedom from work, strain, or responsibility, is one thing, but the absence of mental stress or anxiety is the other thing. And Shabbat can create tranquility, serenity, and repose. And the discussion is how this happens. So when I define Shabbat, this is kind of the test I put it to. I'm not going to necessarily not use my computer, but I won't use it for work. So it helps you to define what you feel your Shabbat should be. And we can also relate this to the environment in the things that we do, are they changing the environment? Are they putting a strain on the environment? Are we appreciating the environment that we have? And that's an interesting thing to, when you go forward and after you study the environment, seeing how you look at things differently the next Shabbat. Okay, then any questions or comments at this point? Okay, all right, so the next topic is Bal Tashchit, which is without question one of my favorites. So the source book that we have discusses two texts. The first is the law from the Torah, and the second, it's development in the Mishnah Torah by Rambam. So we today define Jewish law prohibits wasteful consumption and needless destruction, and we call that the law of Bal Tashchit, do not destroy. But going forward, today the laws of Bal Tashchit are understood as a prohibition against wasting any natural resources in the context of our fragile global environment. The Deuteronomy text describes a common practice in ancient warfare where the attacking nation would destroy its enemies' fruit trees and its fields. So I'll read you what our text is. I love this text because the way it speaks about trees, comparing them to humans. You can tell that I worked at JNF for a long time. I love this because it's just like we were talking about, both humans and trees were from the earth. So it says, when in a war against a city, you have to besiege it a long time in order to capture it. You may not destroy its trees by swinging an axe against them. You may eat of them, but you may not cut them down. Are the trees of the field human to withdraw before you in the besieged city? Which means, like, do you have to fight the trees too? Only trees that you know do not yield food may be destroyed. You may cut them down for constructing siege works against the city that is waging war on you until it has been reduced. So this is a common practice in ancient warfare where they attack the enemy's fruit trees. And now we can compare it to the Mishnah Torah text, which is the next step in Bal Tashchit, becoming what it is today, a prohibition against wasting natural resources in the context of our environment. In the Mishnah Torah text, we see that unlike many legal systems that permit people to destroy their own personal property, Jewish law forbids us to do so. The Eitz Chaim Chumash points out that this follows the Jewish belief that we are only the custodians, not the owners of nature. So not only one who cuts down a fruit tree, but anyone who destroys household goods, tears clothing, demolishes a building, stops at the spring, or ruins food deliberately violates the prohibition, Bal Tashchit, you must not destroy. So this is interesting and very basic to Judaism and the environment. And it's really relevant today to how much we destroy, how much we waste. It's against the Jewish view. Is there anyone who would like to have any kind of a question or comment? Okay, then I will go on and we'll talk about the supplemental materials for this month. The first one is Loat Shabbat, which is great. We're just talking about Shabbat. Shabbat's a time when once a week we're asked to slow down, remind ourselves that we're part of God's creation. This holy day emphasizes the importance of appreciating nature, taking conscious actions to protect the environment. It's especially appropriate to think about the sources of the products that we use. So as we understand where our water, food, and electricity come from, we can make better decisions on how we use and preserve these resources. So if you go to this link, you'll find all kinds of hints. It's ritual well that help us do this on Shabbat. The next is a TED Talk. It's this guy who talks about sanitation as a basic human right. It sounds like it might be boring, but it's really not. I watched it. He's a great speaker. He says this talk might contain much more than you'd ever want to know about the way the world poops. But a sanitation activist and TED fellow Francis de los Reyes asks, doesn't everyone deserve a safe place to go? And he talks about all of these different countries around the world and their sanitation and how, how they suffer from lack of sanitation. But it's a really interesting, well done TED Talk. The next one is also really interesting. It's called What I Discovered in New York City Trash. It's also a TED Talk. And the thing that's interesting too, this woman, Robin Nagel, she looks like she belongs like behind the desk. Maybe she's a lawyer or something. But what she did was she volunteered. She worked as a New York sanitation person. She drove a truck. She was like loading garbage in a truck because she really wanted to know. She started with statistics about waste, and she went on and she just really wanted to learn more about it. So she started a research project with the city's Department of Sanitation. She walked the routes, she operated the mechanical brooms, she even drove the garbage truck herself. It's a simple sounding question, and that is, who cleans up after us? And I'm also glad that how you can get a copy of the PowerPoint. I will send it out. I always attach it to my follow-up email. So that way you'll have these links. Then the last supplemental link, it's the Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center. For those of you who live on the East Coast, it's in Connecticut. They have all kinds of interesting stuff there. My kids went there for Teva when they were in 9th grade. They spent a few days there. They have all kinds of farm vacations and workshops and festivals, yoga classes, retreats. That was the first place I ever saw a biodiesel engine. They ran it on McDonald's, leftover McDonald's French fry oil. And they've got all kinds of interesting things going on. So you can check it out. And if you're, within distance of it, it's a fun place to visit. It's very interesting. And now is really my time for Q&A. If anybody else has something that they would like to ask or talk about, this is the time for it. Okay, so I'm gonna just also say that we have 3 new topics coming out for the summer. They are leadership, death and loss, right before Tisha B'Av, and the Ark of the Holidays, right before the fall holidays. They're almost ready. The first one I can send out as a PDF. We're already sending them out to people who are interested. And the other 2 will be available $4, $2 per book. And we'll be able to do that. If you have any questions, now is the time. Okay. It always feels funny to say goodbye to people who I can't see or hear, but thank you for joining. And I hope to talk to you next time. I will do leadership. Okay, thank you.